The St. Louis Blues have announced that defenseman Torey Krug will undergo ankle surgery and will miss the entire 2024-25 season. So what does this mean for the Blues on offense, defense, and special teams? What does it mean for their cap situation? Which players will need to step up in his absence? Alec and I are going to talk about all that and more on this episode of Note News. All right, it's official. Torey Krug is out for the 2024-25 season. Not exactly a surprise. So we're going to sort of talk about what it all means today. But before we do, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Rate the podcast wherever you listen. Like this video. We appreciate all that. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod. If you want to follow along there, we post some cool shorter videos and some graphics if you're interested in all that. And share Note News with a friend. We appreciate that. So, Alec, Torey Krug is out. What is sort of your first reaction to him missing the season? Obviously, you can criticize Krug's performance and his contract and sort of the way the past few seasons have sort of played out. But I think it's obviously a not great for him, the person, right? You feel bad for Torey Krug, the person. So what is your reaction, first of all, to the news that Torey Krug will be missing the upcoming 24-25 season?
Yeah, I just want to echo that too. We wish him a speedy recovery. You never want anyone to undergo this kind of injury, athlete or not. And it does on the roster churn and planning for the season kind of things. It does kind of make things a lot easier. And also how as you said, it's not exactly exciting or unexpected news. I think we all kind of were waiting to hear this when they announced it, I want to say about a month ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it does for the St. Louis Blues Hockey Club for next season. It does make their roster pairing more interesting. It makes them more exciting and makes it a lot easier too. Also, yeah, for cap reasons and everything and whatnot, things do get interesting there too. But I think it's all kind of working out in the Blues' favor.
Yeah, I'd say so. It's sort of a little bit good, a little bit bad. Obviously, we'd rather have someone like Torey Krug playing than a Ryan Suter, as we've mentioned before. I don't think that's crazy to say. But like you said, it does free up a roster spot and makes things interesting. So before we sort of talk about what it all means, a little bit of background. So I think it was back in sort of the middle of July or maybe towards the end of July that they made that first announcement that he had been diagnosed with what they said were pre-arthritic changes in his left ankle, whatever that means. But it seems like something that he's been dealing with for just a long time, sort of like a recurring injury. And they said that surgery could be possible, but that they would reevaluate and he would try to heal with non-surgical methods. Until then, obviously that hasn't worked. So now he'll have to undergo surgery. But like we said, it's not exactly a surprise with some of the Blues moves this offseason. There were a lot of signs pointing this way, namely like the Ryan Suter signing was a little bit of a head scratcher until the Torey Krug situation came out. Obviously, they're trying to replace that sort of veteran defenseman, another left-handed defenseman as well. They also signed P.O. Joseph, another left-handed defenseman, or is he? I'm not sure actually if he is, but they signed P.O. Joseph, and then Philip Broberg is a left-handed defenseman who they acquired via offer sheets from Edmonton, of course. So a lot of overhauling of the blue line, and the fact that they were so proactive about doing that this offseason, I think points to the fact that they saw this coming, right? Like we said, the signs were sort of pointing this way, even with their forward group that they signed. Like names like Radek Faksa and Matthew Joseph were more defensively minded players. So definitely trying to fill that hole left by Torey Krug's absence. So why don't we get into what this actually means for both Torey Krug and the Blues? And let's start with Torey Krug, the player, the person. What does this mean for him? So obviously he will miss this upcoming season, which would be the fifth year of his seven-year contract. assuming he returns next season, he'll have 2 years left on his contract. Do you think, Alec, that there's a chance that he maybe doesn't recover? Do you think we'll see him next season? Do you think this could be the end of his Blues career or even his NHL career, as awful as that would be? Do you think there is a scenario that in which that happens?
I would say that I think also P.O. Joseph does shoot left, as
Okay,
just checked on
gotcha.
that. I would be pretty surprised if this were the end of his NHL career. Very few details have been given out in this whole situation, so it's hard exactly to say whether or not this is truly something serious that he might need to retire from hockey early to do so.
Hmm.
Um, I would say more likely that he does come back the following season and will be playing for an NHL team. Has he played his last time on ice as a Blues player? I think that remains to be seen. I'm not going to say that it's necessarily likely that as soon as he is off LTIR or IR, whichever they choose, that they're immediately going to shop and trade him around. That could
Hmm.
happen. Probably wouldn't feel very good from Krug's camp, but I think a lot of Blues fans are probably pining for that. It's just
Hmm.
hard to say. I do think it's interesting too. As you said, kind of the Blues. It seems like they knew about this for a while and they kind of prepared for it. And I think that kind of makes sense. So last year we saw Krug really take a massive step down defensively, and he was
Hmm.
already never really like a lockdown defensive guy. But I mean, he was frankly, in my opinion, a liability defensively on the ice last year. Um, and that was his age 32/33 season. He was 32 for pretty much the whole season, though. He's 33 now. And while that is on the older side for NHL players, it is a little bit surprising to fall off a cliff like he did. So I think there's a chance that he was probably, as you said, playing injured for quite some time in a Blues uniform.
Yeah.
Um, and so getting back to the circling back all the way to the point of him returning to the NHL, there's a chance if the surgery goes really well and he, goes through physical therapy and everything and recovers, at a really high level, there's a chance that he doesn't, that he comes back and hasn't lost that step. I think the biggest thing last year was he was skating so slow that he just couldn't really make a defensive play. And it's probably hard to do that if you can't feel your ankle. So if he comes back and retains some of his old skating ability, probably not ever like it was as he is getting into the end of his NHL career, but I think there's a chance that he will come back and have a almost a mini resurgence. Again, I'm not saying he'll probably never be the player he was, but like there's a decent chance he could come back from surgery if all goes well and be as good as he was or excuse me, be a lot better than he was as we saw last season. Because yeah, last season he just frankly was not an NHL defenseman.
Hmm.
So what this means for Krug the player and Krug the person is that he's going to go through his training regimen and recovery period, and we wish him all the best in that regard. But
Sure.
how much work he puts into it will kind of determine the remainder of his NHL career.
Right. Yeah. Fingers crossed that he is able to return, like you said. But yeah, I would echo what you said, that it remains to be seen whether or not he'll return as a Blue. Um, so why don't we shift now? Speaking of the Blues, I'm getting better at my segues. Um, Still not great. What does this mean for the Blues defense? We'll start there. That's something that we're touching on a little bit there, sort of talking about Torey Krug's defensive performance. So prior to this happening, there was quite a bit of a log jam on the blue line of left shot defensemen specifically. I think it was something like they had 10 defensemen signed to one-way NHL contracts, and 7 of those 10 were left shot. So quite a bit of imbalance there. So this does help to clear that up a little bit. Um, and I think Torey Krug to start the season, like if he would have been playing this season, I think to start he would be on the second pair with Justin Falk. I think that's pretty safe to say that's where he would start. Um, so they're without their second pairing left-handed defenseman. So who fills that slot? Some candidates I'll throw to you. We've talked a lot about Philip Broberg since he came over. He played, I think, mostly along the right side in Edmonton, but he is a natural left shot defenseman, I believe. And so we've talked about how he is probably going to be the name that slots in there, at least for the first few games of the season, probably. But who do you think could maybe filter in and out of that spot? Maybe we don't see Philip Broberg the entire season, either because he moves up or moves down. So who are some other names that you could see holding that spot on the second pair on the left side? Some other names I'll throw your way, maybe like a Scott Perunovich, a Ryan Suter, who might be a similar profile to Torey Krug. And I don't know, maybe like a P.O. Joseph, although maybe second line is a little high for someone like him. Maybe it's a little high for someone like Scott Perunovich too. But as you mentioned, Torey Krug had a pretty underwhelming season defensively last year. Not that plus minus is a great stat, but I think he had the worst plus minus with a minus 31 last year. So hopefully there can be some improvement there. Any of those names that I threw at you sound like possible candidates to fill that spot?
Yeah, I do think Broberg's probably the guy. I think Armstrong pretty much confirmed that a while back, when the offer sheets were confirmed, that Broberg is going to at least be starting the season on the second pair. The name I'm keeping my eye on is definitely Scott Perunovich. I've talked about him on this podcast before. I'm a bit of a Scott Perunovich, supporter or stan, if you will. I don't necessarily know that he is all the upside in the world, but he's got some upside. He's a Blues drafted guy, so maybe there's a soft spot in my heart for it. And honestly, like I've actually really liked what he's done on like individual plays. I feel like he's really flashed, especially offensively.
Yeah.
And defensively looks okay. So I would be most interested to see Scott Perunovich kind of get some second pair time. And also, I think both Broberg and Perunovich, depending on how the seasons go, could be maybe this is getting a little ahead of the discussion here, but I think they could be in the contention to. And actually, I think I might prefer Perunovich to be the quarterback of at least that second power play, if not the first. But Perunovich is the guy that I would say is going to be chasing for Broberg's spot right out the gate. I mean, who knows? Maybe Joseph playing with his brother or learning from Colton Parayko, the greatest defender of all time. I don't know. Somehow turns it on, but he does seem like more of a third pair guy, and I think Suter's pretty set to be on the third pair as well. So yeah, I would say it's between Broberg and Perunovich, and yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd like to see Broberg there to start the season. I'm really hoping he can play up to that $4.5 million that we'll be paying him. I think it's not out of the realm of possibility. I just really hope that happens. But I would love to see some looks for Scott Perunovich, like you said too, which sort of brings us to the next topic, which is what does this mean for the Blues offense? We've talked, I think, multiple times on here before about how Torey Krug was the leader in points among defensemen last season. So someone's going to have to step up. He had 39 points off of 4 goals and 35 assists. So someone will have to step up. This is something that I've sort of talked about before, and I wrote an article over on Bleed and Blue about it. I think some of the main candidates to fill that spot, I'll start with Justin Falk. He profiles as someone that should have a better offensive season than he did last year. I think last year was sort of a step down from where his career had been typically. I think there's a chance that he sort of steps back up and becomes the leader in points for defensemen. I think, he put up 47 points in 2021-22. He put up 50 points in 22-23. So I think there's a good chance he could return to that performance. Another name is Colton Parayko, who led defenseman in goals scored. He's obviously going to get a ton of ice time and could just because of getting so much time, be the leader in points. So it'd be cool to see our backup goalie Colton Parayko. Cool to see him have a good offensive season and lead the defenseman in points. Scott Perunovich is another name. I think for Scott Perunovich and the last name I'll mention, Philip Broberg, what we might see is if they were to hypothetically lead defensemen in points, and I'm not saying this is likely to happen or that it will happen, but if either Perunovich or Broberg are going to be the ones to do it, I feel like it's probably going to have to come mostly in assists, like it did with Krug. Broberg obviously doesn't profile as a big goal scorer. I don't think Perunovich does either. But Broberg is a good skater, and I think could be likely to set up some plays well, rack up some assists, and help the offense out that way. Scott Perunovich, I think, is sort of the same in the same boat. I've seen him make some great plays playing the puck up the ice. And I don't know, like, what do you think about offensively, those four names that I threw at you? Any others stand out among defensemen in particular?
I think those are definitely the guys to keep out on. Again, if/when he gets on the ice, P.O. Joseph is supposed to be more of an offensive guy, but really hasn't shown that at this point in the league. Just, I don't know. I figured I'd mention it. Yeah, and I mean, I don't mean to totally repeat myself, so I'm trying to make this different, but this really feels like a very make or break year for Scott Perunovich.
For sure.
He has one more year where he is still under like arbitration rights, and then he'll become a UFA. And this is kind of up to this point in the league, and it is throughout his time with the Blues, he's been like the young guy that we have, and so maybe we've all convinced ourselves that he could be better, or maybe there really is something there. But he doesn't have a lot of time before he reaches unrestricted free agency. And with his career so far, I'm not really sure that he would be making much, really, if any, NHL money. So he's probably, again, the guy I'm looking to step up, although not the guy I expect to lead the team in points. You would think Falk has the best offensive toolkit, although health has been an issue for him, as well as just slumping. And yeah, Parayko and Falk definitely have the goal scoring ability, so most likely it'll be one of those two. But it would be fun if it weren't, for a number of reasons. And I don't know. I think it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think it's really hard to say who will lead the team in points, but yeah, it's just something to monitor, something I will be very curious about.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that one plays out. You touched on it a little bit already a couple minutes ago. Why don't you talk a little bit more about the Blues power play, how you think, obviously Torey Krug has been a big part of the Blues power play in seasons past, and so someone's going to have to step up. You mentioned how maybe Scott Perunovich could maybe be the quarterback on that first power play, maybe the second. So why don't you talk a little bit more about how you think this affects the Blues special teams?
Yeah, I kind of also see this as a roster battle between Perunovich and Broberg, and it's so interesting that they have. I mean, I guess they don't really play similar, but kind of the results feel somewhat similar.
Right.
Anyways, I think, as I said, Falk has the highest offensive ceiling. To me, it makes sense for him to get the first power play role. Although they really do like using Parayko and Nick Leddy on special teams, but they're both getting up there in age. So I don't know. I think it would probably be more fun to watch Falk on that first unit. But if not, Parayko kind of has the rapport and definitely has the chemistry with the guys. I guess I wouldn't be surprised to see him in that role, just maybe a little bit underwhelmed or disappointed. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I truly believe that any permutation here could end up being what the Blues stick with towards the end of the season. So it's just so fascinating, and as I've said a couple times already, definitely something I'll be keeping an eye out. I personally, I think, I kind of feel like they're going to start with Perunovich on the second power play. Maybe that's just rapport. Maybe it's age. Maybe it's a number of things. But if they start with Perunovic, they'll probably do like a, every 2 games or 3 games or whatever, switch between putting, or it could even just be by shifts or by periods or whatever, putting either Perunovic or Broberg. But I kind of like Perunovic's ability when they are more set up in the zone. As you mentioned, Broberg really likes to use his skating, his speed, playing transition to create offensive chances. Perunovic is much more, I guess, responsible in a more set up zone, which is why I lean Perunovic being on that second power play unit. But yeah, I mean, I guess it'll be interesting, and probably between those 4, or I guess technically 5 guys I've named, I would be pretty surprised if anyone else made it on, but I suppose only time will tell at this point.
Yeah, we've got camp starting up this month. Now that it's officially September, we're in the home stretch here for the off season. So excited to see how things will play out at Blues training camp and then also into the season. So I think with like such a like it or not, Torey Krug was a pretty pivotal member of the Blues team on the ice, and so with such a big contributor, or a big, I guess, a sort of a mainstay in the lineup, being out for the season, it is going to be interesting to see what happens. Why don't we talk now about the Blues cap situation before we do get on to this last segment? I just want to say again, if you haven't liked this video or subscribed to our YouTube channel, we'd really appreciate it if you would. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Note News Pod, so you can follow along there, and you can also rate us wherever you listen. We appreciate all that. So the last thing I want to talk about is the Blues cap situation. So the Blues currently, according to Puckpedia, have $2.2 million in cap space, which isn't much, and a lot of that has recently been occupied by the acquisitions of Broberg and Holloway, being around $7 million in cap space. So 2.2 isn't a lot to work with, but if they decide to move Krug to the LTIR, that frees up an additional 6.5 million that they can spend. So Alec, my question for you is, do you think, I guess multiple questions, do you think the Blues will do anything with that extra space before the season starts, maybe to swing a big trade or a big free agent signing? Not that there are very many big free agents, I guess, left on the table, but do you think they'll spend before the season starts, or do you think maybe they could use that space during the season if they decide they're in the running for a playoff spot, maybe take on some salary with a trade? Do you think that they'll do anything with that extra cap space for this season?
I think if anything, mostly it'll probably be used for next offseason. Honestly, I don't really see it being used in this season very much. Potentially, what they could do is, take on more of an expiring but kind of still difficult contract for another team, maybe a 1, 2, maybe 3-year deal, but probably not with where this team wants to be. And get high draft capital in return, because as I broke down before, we don't have a ton of draft capital left for the next couple years, specifically next year. I do think the other thing is that if he goes on LTIR, that frees up cap space for, as I said, this coming off season, to where they could potentially look to shop Krug once again, or with a couple of their sort of value signings from this offseason, like Radek Faksa or Ryan Suter, when those come off the books, or as I just said, Scott Perunovic, when those come off the books, specifically with Perunovic, he'll have 1 year left. I want to make that clear. Then they could use that money potentially for an extension. Maybe if they like what they saw out of Matthew Joseph or Alexandre Texier. Maybe they finally, get something done for Jake Neighbors, or who knows, something else they see. Joe Hofer. There's a lot of other options, but I could see them using that money coming off the books to sign a bigger extension, or probably not like a huge extension. So
yeah,
depending on how the season goes, potentially not like a Jake Neighbors, but yeah, I guess that won't really matter till next offseason anyways.
Yeah, it would be nice, like you said, to acquire some draft capital. That's something I would be, I think, for, even if they do take on maybe a difficult salary situation with another player or something, that would be good for the team's future. Maybe also they could like package that with sending away some of our bad contracts. Like I know it's weird to think of like acquiring one bad contract just to get off of another, but maybe they could I don't know, trade away like a Justin Falk or something like that to maybe take on a contract with maybe just a little bit less term, sort of what I'm thinking. But we'll just have to wait and see how that all plays out. Obviously, Torey Krug missing the season is a bummer. We don't wish an injury like that on anyone. And I think the Blues as a team would be better if he was in the lineup, and maybe someone that like a Philip Broberg would maybe move down to the third pair. And I think the Blues defense would be a lot better if that was the case. But he's out. That's what's happening, and I think it's important to think about the opportunities created by that. And we've talked about some of that today. Maybe getting I don't think Krug is going to be a big part of the long-term plan as the Blues move out of their retool. So getting a more extended look at some of these younger names like a Broberg, like a Perunovic, I think that'll be really valuable. See who could be a part of the long-term plan moving forward. If you are enjoying Note News, we've got some good news. There's going to be another episode later this week on Friday. We're going to continue our preview of the Central Division. So if you want to know more about some of the Blues division rivals and their outlook for the upcoming season, check that out, where we talk about sort of their off season and how we think they'll do. So I think that'll do it for this episode of Note News. We'll see you next time, and let's go Blues.
Let's go Blues.